This is Pulse of the Pack.
There's Bledsoe. Down he goes. And there's Reggie White. And that's that hump move. Reggie's coming again. And Reggie White. Reggie White's going to take over this game right now.
Begins the count. Takes the snap. He has the quarterback. He's into the touchdown. The Packers are out in front. 20 to 17. And 13 seconds showing on the clock. And the Green Bay Packers are going to be world champions, NFL champions for the third straight year.
Barr lays it up for Freeman, and it's incomplete. Or did he make the catch at the 15? What are they going to roll it? He caught it. Touchdown. He did what?
That video never ceases to make me smile. It's one of those, it's really strange because that Packers team didn't even make the playoffs, but just the idea that there was a little bit of magic left at Lambeau Field on that given day. So thank you, everybody, and welcome aboard to our Sunday show. I'm your host today. I am Jacob Westendorf. I am joined by Jason Perrone, as always, but you guys don't care about us at this point. You know who's here. You know why we're here. Paul is not here, which makes us sad, but we upgraded. And that wasn't too hard to do, but we were able to upgrade with the great Michelle Bruton, our original first guest we ever had on this show. Gosh, probably 5-6 years ago at this point now. Michelle, we just mentioned the first time that we're doing video, and thank you. You said that wasn't exactly thrilling for you. So thank you for toughing that one out and rearranging your bookshelf or not. We'll keep that a secret. To
never know. Thank you. No, thank you guys for having me. I don't think I realized that I was the OG guest. So this is quite, and this is the first time the show's been video, period.
Oh no, we did.
Just my first time. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, we did a little bit last year. This is our 5th show, I think, with this particular platform. So it's been a lot of fun. Justin Backwards says he's excited and that Michelle is awesome. So we agree. That's why she's here. Let's get rolling, guys. We've got training camp and everything going on, obviously, here. But Michelle, it's been a little while since we've talked, and you mentioned before that you've done some stuff for the Packers Wire and you did some stuff for the Draft Wire. So I want to go back in time a little bit since we haven't talked. That's the question everybody wants to know. What are your thoughts on Jordan Love as that pick is made? Green Bay's on the clock. They were not on the clock. They trade up. Are you thinking there's any chance they go quarterback? Did you think there was a chance going into that night that they would go quarterback?
Well, there's, I guess, a segment of Packers Twitter that would blame me for the Jordan Love pick, just period, because maybe like 3 picks before, we'd all been chatting about like who they would go with. And I just sort of, just like literally half joking was like, watch it be Jordan Love. And then it was, and people were, and I jinxed it and it was this horrible thing. And oh my God. And it was, I would say that at this point, and this draft obviously was already so bizarre, but I would say at this point that it's been a long time since I've, the shock value of the draft, I think, wears off after a while. Like it's hard. And that's probably, honestly, as genuinely shocked as I've been, maybe since Aaron Rodgers. And that's right, because that's quarterback is always the most important position in the draft when it's your team taking one. So yeah, even though I called it and was blamed maybe for jinxing it, I was shocked.
Shocked is definitely a good word to put that. And I think it's funny you say the shock value wears off, because Jason and I have virtually watched the last 2 drafts together and each of their first round picks, because Packers obviously had 2 the year prior. So Rashawn Gary and Jordan Love both were stunned silence. So it's kind of crazy that you're saying the shock value wears off on that, because I don't think, and I don't know, but I don't think a lot of people had Rashawn Gary pegged to the Packers before that pick was made either.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but I guess I'll make a distinction between surprise and shock. Because surprise is like, that's not who I thought, or like it's a position I thought, but not the player I thought. But I don't let alone no one having Jordan Love in there, on their draft board. I don't think anyone had quarterback in the first round. So truly just out of left field.
Yeah, and there were some whispers. I mean, there were some whispers out there about Jordan Love and eventually the Packers having to move on from Aaron Rodgers.
And they liked him a lot.
Yeah, and that's popular with some, and then with other factions of the fan base, obviously you have the litany of those that don't want to ever think about the day that Aaron Rodgers isn't playing quarterback for the Packers. And for those of you who saw video that came out of practice today, Jordan Love missed the net, Aaron Rodgers hit the net. So old man is showing the young buck how it's done in the NFL. But so since it's been a while, because I honestly think if I'm thinking back and I'm accurate here, Michelle, the last time I remember us talking, I was still living in Minnesota, which was like 2016. And we had the fun conversation about the Packers potentially pursuing Matt Forte. That's how long ago that was. Right.
I wasn't going to bring it up, but
that was
the pun that will live in infamy.
Yeah, their forte. Right. Well, and that's why we bring you on. That's why it's been way too long since. So we have a lot to catch up on, but let's expand a little bit. So take us back a year. Rashawn Gary, they drafted him last year. So, what were you thinking when that happened? And now the question with Gary is, we have some tape on him. We've seen him in game action, and clearly the Packers have high expectations. First of all, they drafted him very highly, used a lot of investment on him. They let Kyler Fackrell leave. Rashawn Gary is a big part of the plan on defense. Do you feel confident that year two is going to look, he's in great shape coming into camp, that he is in year two going to look and be markedly better than he was last year?
Yeah, and that right. Like year two is, I almost feel like we just need to stop expecting anything from anyone in year one, right? Like everyone gets so disappointed. Oh my God, is this guy a bust? And like the conversation start. And yes, for a first round pick, the hope is that you're going to get someone who you can plug and play day one and they'll be great. But like, that's just really not realistic. And I think if we adjusted our expectations and sort of realized that like, once they've had a year in the system, year two is when it's fair to be like, hey, this is your time. Like you've got to live up to your draft billing. You've got to produce. So like I was saying with you guys, I guess I would say I was surprised, not shocked when they drafted him, because that's a position that they've always loved. They've come up with these really creative packages for their rushers, the NASCAR and everything. I think, especially because they've been struggling on the inside, and now I think really what they need to do is beef up the defensive line. But I think they've always prized their outside rush as kind of their forte, if you will, bring it back. And they wanted to keep it strong. And I think that people always want teams to draft for deficits. But, if you're a team that's always contending every year, you've got to keep your strength to strength as well. And so, he's been obviously one of the people that we've been watching closely in training camp. And, yesterday he blows by Billy Turner and almost sacked Aaron Rodgers. And then today he was all over in the red zone. He shut Aaron Rodgers down, I think, like 3 different times in the red zone. So from what we're seeing in camp so far, which again, I am not one of those people who, thinks training camp means anything about the regular season because they're not playing against, the NFL's best. But I'm really liking what I'm seeing from him. And because I believe firmly that you need to keep your strengths to strength, like I think, I had no qualms with the pick, and I knock on wood, God far be it for me to jinx anything else. But I think that they're going to be pleased with, what they invested in him come 5 years down the road.
Yeah, we had a story written over at Packer Report last year after they took Rashawn Gary, and Jacob Morley basically broke down categories and size and strength and speed and all this stuff that Mike Pettin prefers with his edges. And Rashawn Gary hits every single one of them in the top percentiles of his preferences. So it's one of those things that it was a surprise at the time, maybe to all of us, but it kind of felt like something that maybe should have been staring all of us in the face as well with that sort of pick. And I like what you said about keeping strengths and maybe not necessarily drafting for deficits, because if you really look back on it, when Ted Thompson was at his best in Green Bay is when he was taking best available players. They didn't need a quarterback when they drafted Aaron Rodgers. They didn't need a receiver when they drafted Jordy Nelson. They didn't necessarily need a safety when they drafted Nick Collins. Later in his years, when he started trying to address needs in the draft, is kind of when some of those, that's how you end up picking Demarius Randall and Quentin Rollins and some of these guys that haven't exactly worked out. One of a lot of reasons, obviously, that it goes that way. So the draft overall is interesting. It's always a crapshoot, I guess is the proper term. And it's going to be fun to see how that works with the as of right now, limited college football season with the Big Ten and the Pac-12 not playing. And as of today, ACC, Big 12, and SEC are all scheduled to play. We'll see if that actually takes place or not. But that'll make the draft even more fluky, I guess, if you will, than anything else. Somebody else that I think we need to jump in on, Jason mentioned Rashawn Gary. Bill Huber of SI today said that he was an army of one in red zone period. So I'm happy you brought that up. And that's interesting, because when we get to something a little bit later, I think that's kind of the guy that I think they'll come to mind first, one of people. But the other one is Josh Jackson. And as you guys can see, I am all on the hype train again. I have hidden this jersey for 2 years because it hasn't gone that well. I bought this jersey after they drafted him. It's the first time maybe ever that they've drafted my draft crush. And I bought this jersey. It's a really nice one. It's sewn on and everything. And then it hasn't worked out for 2 seasons. So in those 2 years, I think the most interesting line that's come out today is Josh Jackson met with the media and said he's been working solely at outside corner and solely focused on cornerback. And that's interesting because just last year, Mike Pettin said that they felt slot cornerback was his best position, which was met with a lot of, when they said that, because he never really played it at Iowa. His skill set and his deficiencies aren't really conducive to that of a slot cornerback. It kind of leads me to wonder, like, what is the thought process that changed between year 1 and 2 to year 3 now, where they're saying he's only playing outside corner and he's playing relatively well compared to camp? Is this a guy that you think could be one of those people that you mentioned? He hasn't lived up to his draft status last year. If you mentioned that year 2 leap, it didn't happen. He was on the bench for the majority of the season. Is this somebody that we could see as a bit of a late bloomer going into what is now his 3rd year, kind of a make or break season for Josh Jackson?
Yeah. And so, kind of piggybacking on this idea that, like, we need to be more, I don't like the word forgiving because that feels like a value judgment. We need to be more patient about, players in their first year. Well, if you're having players, if you're moving them around to all different positions and messing with, like, what their role and responsibility is going to be, you're just, if they're really good at that, then you have a jack of all trades, multi-purpose, what's Swiss Army knife. I was like, what cliche am I trying to think of? Then you have a Swiss Army knife, which is great, but that's not always easy for a lot of players, especially a player who's in their first year. So I think I want to give credit. I think it was Zach Jacobson on Twitter shared this really interesting nugget, which was that as a rookie, Josh Jackson played over 67% of the Packers snaps. And then in 2019, he played less than 10% of the Packers snaps. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is he was expected to play all these different positions. And the Packers have had so many, obviously we've mentioned, Randall and Rollins, and we've seen so many players who are kind of like either tweeners, or they could be a safety, or they could be a corner. They could play inside, they could play outside. And I think for a hot second, the Packers were, really excited by the idea of kind of like getting a 2-for-1 deal. And it's just not how it works. You need someone who specializes. And like I said, if they have those, additional skills and you can use them as a Swiss Army knife, that's all the better. But I don't think you should be drafting guys expecting them to do that for you. So with Josh Jackson, I don't even really think we can think of this as year 3, like maybe year 2.5. I think we have to see, like, well, once he's given the luxury of kind of, if he truly does become like a perimeter corner specialist, what can he look like when a lot of that is taken off his plate and he's just allowed to, like, focus on really doing one job well.
We have a question from one of our favorites that's been with us for a long time. Justin Backwards wants to know what your thoughts are on Jerry Gray and his influence on Josh Jackson. Any opinions yet on Jerry Gray and the limited little that we know about what he's done so far?
Yeah, I won't pretend that I have seen or know so much about Jerry Gray's interactions with the defensive backs that I can speak to his influence. But I think, as you guys mentioned already, like last year, the company line we were hearing was that Pettin, really wanted to see Jackson playing out of the slot, and Jackson had been playing all these different positions. And then, with Jerry Gray, we're starting to now hear this kind of like conflicting information that he's always going to be on the perimeter. And so I suspect that Jerry Gray has sort of seen something in Josh Jackson that maybe either wasn't apparent before, or that the rest of the defensive coaching staff just wasn't catching or wasn't ready to believe. And so if it turns out that Jackson just kills it as a perimeter corner, and we can kind of trace that back to Jerry Gray as sort of like a defensive backs whisperer, like how incredible to take a player who you had really high hopes in and kind of like salvage his career by focusing him on the area that he, can thrive in.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the secondary as a whole, because I mean, obviously, you're a pundit, I guess, to use a terrible term first and foremost, but you're also a fan of the team. And I think that you can understand over the last, really since 2014, when the Packers had Sam Shields, Tremont Williams, Casey Hayward, Devon House in his prime. They had a really good secondary back then. You go all the way back to 2010 when they had Sam Shields, Tremont Williams, Charles Woodson, Nick Collins. That's the last time they had an elite secondary. And the word elite is thrown around, I think, a little too much. But Matt LaFleur has said it. The players have said it. And I think that it's a group that doesn't lack for confidence. But you start talking about Jerry Gray and his influence on a guy like Jair Alexander and Kevin King, who is standing up to Devontae Adams at camp, and Josh Jackson, who's doing well, and Chandon Sullivan, who they haven't even blinked in terms of basically making him their starting slot corner and all the things that they could do with that. And then you add in guys like Smash and Darnell Savage on the back end. How close is this group to being an elite group? And what can that do for the entire defense when you add in the fact that, hey, not only do they have an elite secondary, but then you add in the Super Smith brothers and Kenny Clark and an emerging Rashawn Gary.
Right. And I'm so glad you brought up that last point, because I think, right, it's all interconnected. The first thing I think, when you were talking about kind of the previous iterations of elite secondaries, the thing that obviously I think frustrated so many Packers fans in the last few years was that the Packers drafted, stumbled across, not stumbled, there's a lot of work that goes into it, but we're lucky enough to land Casey Hayward and Micah Hyde. And it's kind of this whole philosophy the team has of you should retain your homegrown players, and they didn't. And so I think a lot of people have been frustrated because they felt like there was a chance to have the secondary kind of not maybe take as much of a step back as it did. And money is the thing that got in the way, which if you're, not really using free agency and trying, now they are, but, then you're trying to just keep your players, that's, kind of defeating the whole point. But that point aside, I really love that you brought up what they're doing with the front seven, because I think that, it's a tale of gold this time, but I think we forget about it sometimes, even though it's such a fundamental, that the best thing you can do for your secondary is to have a strong front seven, because if they're doing their jobs lights out, it just takes so much of the pressure off of your secondary. And I think what we've seen is, even looking at obviously the 2010 Super Bowl defense was the best, and even the year after that, I think they were still top 10, I think in pass and run stop, if I remember correctly.
That was the prior year, 2011. They were the worst defense in the
NFL.
Right.
And so you're not getting back to that level, obviously, but I think that inside linebacker has clearly been a deficit for this team for years and years that they've just been unable to address for whatever reason. And I think that's hurt a lot. And with the pass rush, that's sort of what we were talking about earlier with Rashawn Gary, is just this idea that you have to keep a strength. And if your pass rush is suffering, your secondary is going to suffer too. So I think that this year, given what we're seeing with the Smith Bros and what we're seeing up front, and given that we've got a lot of guys in the secondary now who are sort of expecting to take that next step and to take that jump, it could all congeal to, that's a gross word. It could all kind of come together and just really be this magical, dare I say it, 2010-esque year where they're just firing on all cylinders. They certainly on paper have the talent. The big caveat and the thing that's heartbreaking for so many fans of really great sports teams right now is that we have no idea, it could all be for naught, or it's a weird season. One player gets sick and all of a sudden the whole thing falls apart. But on paper, it's really all there. And so there are about a million different variables that could, keep them from contending. But it's, they've got what they need theoretically. It's just, can it execute?
Yeah, we're talking about floors and ceilings, and there's always a million variables in a football season anyways.
Yeah.
Add in COVID-19 and that adds, we've said it a million times on this show, Jason, you're one cotton swab away from, knock on wood, Zadarius Smith sitting for 2 weeks, or, I don't know exactly how the protocols work, how many positives they need, or negative tests they need once they have a positive. I can only speak to what the rule is in my job, which is you need to have 2 negatives 24 hours apart. I don't know how long that would take, but with daily testing, I suppose maybe they could get back a little faster after a positive. But it remains to be seen. So, Jason, I apologize, but I just wanted to throw that point in there.
Well, and Zadarius is part of that culture on defense, and I think that's what's going to help these guys maybe make what you said come true, Michelle, is that's there's a lot to be said about the 2010 team and how tight they were. And I think with Zadarius and Preston Smith and the way that everybody responds to them, and you add Jerry Gray into that mix too, there's a chance that this defense could be great. So Sanjay of the Freezer podcast jumps in here, wants to make sure to say hello to you, Michelle. Says go Blues first and foremost.
Oh God.
But he wants to know if Chandon Sullivan is going to beat out Josh Jackson while we're on the topic of cornerback. And I guess, for me, Chandon Sullivan, it seems like would be your de facto slot guy. If Josh is going to move outside, maybe they're on the field at the same time, and maybe that's your answer.
Yeah. First of all, I feel like I should boycott this question because I'm still suffering from. So my husband's a Blues fan, and watching the Stanley Cup Finals last year in this household, it's a miracle I'm still married. But that being said, I don't necessarily know, looking at position battles, that's a mutually exclusive proposition. I think right now, and this, I kind of change this daily, but my current thinking on the roster is that they're going to keep maybe 6 corners, and it's going to be Alexander, King, Sullivan, Jackson, Hallman, and Samuels, who's kind of like a late bloomer addition. So I don't think that necessarily, like you said, I could see situations that they're both on the field at the same time, and all the better for the Packers, because I think they both bring strengths that you don't necessarily want to subtract from the equation.
Right.
Good, Jason. Thank you for adding that. I thought there was going to be more to that. So.
Expert color analyses.
No, I agree. I think, I think they're going to have a decent amount of cornerbacks. And I think the nice part is, I think Andy Herman talked about this when I spoke with him a little while ago, of they kind of have a guy for any kind of skill set. You're facing a big receiver like that. Okay, we've got Kevin King. Okay, you need somebody who's with a little smaller and twitchier type. We've got Jair Alexander for that. I wonder if at some point, if Josh Jackson is really good, for example, something they could do in their dime package is put Alexander and Sullivan in their slots with Jackson and King on the outside. I think that's something they might play with a little bit as well. So I'll be interested to see that. Defense is boring. I think that every Packer fan here obviously wants to talk about the offense, and everything we talk about starts with QB1. Oh, the mirror thing happened again. QB1. Number 12, Aaron Rodgers. And the first question I have to ask you, because regardless of what the Packers say, when you trade up for a quarterback who's a raw project from Utah State, you're saying something about how you feel about your quarterback situation for the next 2 or 3 years. My question is, obviously Rodgers isn't putting up gaudy numbers. He hasn't played like an MVP since 2017 before he broke his collarbone. Do you think that it's a case of maybe a perfect storm of things? He played on a broken leg for the majority of 2018. Him and Mike McCarthy, that had obviously run their course. Last year, he's playing in a new offense with, let's call it, a limited weapon base. Mm-hmm. Is it that, or does he have some skills that are eroding, and maybe the Packers are starting to see that before all of us are willing to acknowledge it, maybe before all of us are?
Yeah, so ultimately, people really don't like to think about it this way, but the Packers are a business first and foremost. And they're trying at the end of the day, to protect their franchise and their investment. So I think the answer lies in Aaron Rodgers' contract, which when you look at it, yes, you can say he's under contract till 2024. In his mind, I think that he's staying with the team until 2024, God forbid any injuries or anything. But when you look at the structure of the contract, like, it would never happen. But let's say like he got injured in training camp and Jordan Love blew everyone away and they were just like, you know what, we're done. So his dead cap this year is $51 million, which is insane. And next year it's $31 million. So he's not going anywhere until at least 2022. I would, bet a lot of money on that. But 2022, they have an out built into his contract where he'd only have 17 million dead cap hit. And I think given that that's the way they structured his contract, it makes a lot of sense then to think that they wanted to take this draft to get who they think or believe might be his heir apparent. And if he develops at the rate that they want and they give him, a solid 2 years playing under Rodgers, by 2022, when they have that first potential out in his contract, I think that's the first opportunity they see to make that transition happen. Rodgers knows that too, obviously, because he knows the way his contract is structured. I think it would still be pretty messy at that point if it was only 2 years away. Obviously, that would mean that Rodgers isn't ending his career in a Packers jersey, and I think that's what everyone wants for him, even though it's so, even Tom Brady, like, if there was anyone I thought would end their career in their, iconic jersey, it'd be Tom Brady. So, that's kind of the business and the contract side of it. Playing wise, Matt LaFleur, part of his kind of pedigree and selling point is that he is supposed to be this quarterback whisperer. And, you look at some of what he's done. He had some really great talent, in the Falcons and the Rams. And, Marcus Mariota, I think, gets kind of a bad rap. I'm like weirdly in my office, like the Marcus Mariota stan, which like, it's not that I'm
okay. We can have that discussion later because I think he stinks. So
and certainly it's not like I have like stats or when you dig into the numbers, they're not great. It's sort of like a Jay Cutler thing where like you can't stop thinking about the potential, even though the reality is staring you in the face. But anyways, that's getting off topic. Matt LaFleur, I think, the way his quarterbacks have performed, the way Mariota performed, like, isn't necessarily an indictment on LaFleur's scheming and system. And, with Rodgers, I think the whole point, they sort of started to do this under McCarthy, but especially with LaFleur, like, LaFleur's whole offense in its entirety is based on this idea that run plays and pass plays start out looking the same. And it can morph into either one. And there's a lot of, the run game almost takes precedence. And you can look at some stats and you can look at some film and say, oh, well, Aaron Rodgers is regressing. Maybe it's just that Aaron Rodgers is running the Matt LaFleur version of this offense where he's really relying on the running backs more. We all love to see him roll out and throw across his body, 60 yards into the end zone. But like it's great when Aaron Rodgers doesn't have to throw the ball when both of his feet are off the ground across his body. Like, we love to see it, but that's not something you should ever scheme for. So, I think that I think it's fair to think that maybe his arm and maybe the injuries have started to wear his body down. His mind obviously is as sharp as ever. And I think we just need to, when we evaluate Aaron Rodgers, it's not to say that we can't ever criticize him, but I think that we need to do it within the framework of what this offense ideally looks like now. And that's maybe not what we're used to seeing.
That was as beautiful of a transition as I could possibly have imagined. Jake, you seem like you had something to add.
I did, because the thing that I thought of immediately, and this is the question I should have asked first, though, because when we talked about it, not this time, but last year, after December 2nd, we're talking about who the next head coach is going to be. And a lot of people had, Josh McDaniels or a defensive minded head coach to maybe kind of just let Aaron run the offense. And to your credit, Michelle, you said Matt LaFleur. And what I want to know is I want to go back into maybe that time frame, because at the time, LaFleur had obviously been connected with the right guys. That's the phrase Mark Murphy used with Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay. But he was on a Titans offense at the time that finished in the bottom third of the league in terms of production. So what was it? Because that's the hardest thing, I think, the conversations I had when they hired LaFleur was the same as what I would say is I don't really have an expectation. He's an offensive assistant. I've never seen him be a head coach. I have no idea if it's a good hire or not. That's why I think good hire, bad hire is, unless it's like Jim Tomsula, then where it's very obvious that's not going to work, especially after having a nail spitter like Jim Harbaugh before that. That's just like a really bad transition between those two. But unless you've seen that person be a head coach, you have no idea if it's a good hire or not. What was it that stuck out to you to say, nope, that's the guy I want the Packers to hire?
Yeah. So in a weird way, the failures of the 2018 Tennessee Titans, I think, are what gave us Matt LaFleur. If the Tennessee Titans hadn't finished 25th in total offense and 29th in passing offense, I don't think the Packers are able to get Matt LaFleur, because I think he would have been one of the hottest candidates on the market and everyone would have wanted him. So I think, he was obviously kind of this dark horse candidate. I never thought it would be McDaniels because, McCarthy's offense has gotten stale and he hasn't really progressed, I think, at the level you want from an NFL coach. But I think it's pretty clear to see that one of the biggest reasons he was ousted is that he and Aaron Rodgers were just butting heads and clashing. And talk about clashing personality types, Josh McDaniels and Aaron Rodgers would have been a disaster. And so just based on that alone, I didn't think there was any way that they would bring such a potentially explosive head coach into what was already kind of like a simmering pot of a situation. And so, LaFleur, obviously, time will bear out whether the Shanahan coaching tree really is kind of this, total like dynamic game
homegrown coaching tree.
Yeah. I think, we've kind of simmered down on the like, oh my God, this guy like once shook hands with Sean McVay situation. But, the 49ers were in the Super Bowl. The Rams continue to be contenders. And so
your husband made you say that.
No, I have a soft spot for the Rams. It's, the Seahawks and the Giants that I really don't like very much. But anyways, so I think that, obviously that alone, you look at the tenets of kind of that Shanahan West Coast offense, and you find that they work very well with Aaron Rodgers. And you look at what LaFleur was able to do with Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, and Matt Ryan. I don't think a lot of people think Matt Ryan, Matt LaFleur, but he was in Atlanta, and a lot of people, when he got the opportunity to go to Los Angeles, I think a lot of people were like, well, the Falcons just let him go, so how good could he be? But I think the Falcons knew he was ready. Oh God, I'm going to make another pun, to spread his wings. I did not mean to make a bird pun. All the knocks against him were just like inexperience, sure, but the young coach is the new du jour, trend in the NFL. And the fact that the Falcons let him go, that doesn't mean that he's not great. It might have just meant that they were ready to move on. So I think ultimately when you look at the way the Titans offense did that year, so much of it was just that they lost Delaney Walker in week 1, and he was kind of Mariota's parachute. And without him, the offense kind of just fell apart. They really didn't have a lot of passing weapons outside of Delaney Walker. Corey Davis, Taywan Taylor.
Their best receiver last year was a guy they just drafted. So, AJ Brown's awesome, but that says something about the previous year's weapons.
Yeah, I think ultimately what the organization was able to see in LaFleur was that he was holding potentially a golden ticket in his playbook and his ideas, and he had just never gotten the personnel to really see it play out. And they felt like it was a perfect marriage of you've got the blueprints and we've got what would the opposite of that be? The machinery, the whatever. You've got the blueprints, we've got the products. When we put them together, it's what we want. So ultimately, it was really a perfect marriage. It was someone who had what looked to be the hottest new offense in the NFL, and a team that had maybe the best quarterback in the league and a lot of supporting weapons who were about ready to kind of step up.
So we've talked about Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers now. and we think about the Packers offense, which Jacob mentioned earlier, everyone wants to talk about because of all the changes and all of the personnel that the Packers have put into the offense. There's been a lot of hype around Josiah DeGuara and what he's going to do. Tyler Ervin's taking reps at wide receiver. Jay Sternberger's primed for a breakout season. You've got the wide receiver battle, the running back situation, A.J. Dillon and his thighs, A.J. Dillon's legs, or A.J. Dillon's thighs. Twitter account is following me now. I'm so excited.
You've made it.
But when we talk about the Packers offense,
Mm-hmm.
what is the key to unlocking the offense in your eyes? Is it Matt LaFleur and his system? Is it the quarterback? I mean, what's it going to take for this offense to be everything I think that everybody kind of hopes that it's going to be in 2020?
Yeah. So first of all, I think the kind of scary thing about this offense this year, just given what we've seen traditionally from the Packers, who have kept 6 or even 7 wide receivers some years, is I don't see how they keep more than 5 this year because they have so many players that they need to keep now at running back and tight end. So if they have, Jones, Williams, Dillon, and Irvin running back, and if they've got Lewis, Sternberger, Tanyan, and DeGuara at tight end, that only leaves 5, in my eyes, 5 wide receivers. And I'm thinking it's some combination of, Adams, Lazard, Valdez Scantling, St. Brown, and then Funchess. But I think actually at wide receiver, I think a lot of this hinges on MVS. This is the year that I think he needs to break out. If they can have like a big 3 again, who can be reliably counted on, and I think Lazard, we are all already assuming is there. But I think really when you look at it, when you look at the Matt LaFleur offense, and like we were saying before, the idea that this offense is so predicated on the run and is so predicated on the idea that all of your plays, they look so simple. And the idea is that even though they look simple, they're not easy to defend because there's, so many different ways you could go with all these plays that start out looking the same. I think that means that all hinges on the running backs. And when you've got, Jones, Williams, Dillon, I think that ultimately what they want is for Jones and Dillon to be able to be 3-down backs who are, not rotating anyone in on 3rd down always, but maybe having like Jones and Dillon be alternating drives and just like carrying full drives. And then if you have like the Packers in the red zone and you've got like Sternberger on one hand, like you've got obviously Devontae Adams, and then you have Jones or Dillon, like who can stop that? Who can, prevent them from getting it in, even at the 3-yard line, the 2-yard line? Like you've got Jones or Dillon, I don't know what defense is going to be thrilled.
Yeah,
by that.
It's a pick your poison scenario.
Right.
For them.
Right. And so I think actually, I think with Dillon, people were like, oh, like Boston College, like what is this? He wasn't really used as a receiver in college. And I think one of the most interesting things, and that's, I don't want to spoil anything, but I think we were going to talk about who like our guy of the summer is. And so because that's basically what I'm talking about now, I'll just basically talk about the fact that it's Dillon. And I think, I like this idea that there might be something to unlock in him that no one's really seen before. Like that's obviously very exciting. And Gutekunst and one of the scouts, Mike Owen, both said they felt Dillon had more to offer as a receiver than his collegiate stats would otherwise indicate. So I don't know, it kind of gives me chills. Like I'm like, this could be a player that we haven't even seen what he can do. And if he fits into this offense like the puzzle piece they think he is, it could be unbelievable.
Yeah, and I think that's what everyone's excited about is all the changes and making sense of the 2020 draft because of all the question marks. I mean, everybody, the Love pick we talked about already. We've been over that already. And then when Dillon was the pick in round 2, I think it is safe to say that there weren't many that saw that coming. And there were plenty of questions about that. And all the analysts came out and were grading the draft, and the Packers did not grade well. But it could turn out to be, listen, they had a plan, they had a vision. And if it all comes to what it should be to fruition, this could actually end up in hindsight being one of the better drafts. And then legacies are formed by these types of things if it all works out, and especially if Jordan Love is able to carry the torch when Aaron Rodgers eventually moves on in Green Bay.
Yeah, that's definitely your legacy pick, if you will, if you're Brian Gutekunst. I like the Dylan idea. It must be something about our dark-haired female hosts here that we have, because they love Maggie Loney, Michelle Bruton. They love AJ Dillon. So I'm excited to see him on the field as well. I think it was Kabion Ento tackled him in open space today in practice. So he should make the team, if nothing else, for that reason alone.
Right.
Sounds like a good one for me. But, the potential here I like of Jones and Dillon is their styles complement each other so well. And I thought Jamal Williams, Big B, shout out, that his style complemented Aaron Jones as well. But Dillon's really does. And you can tell Matt LaFleur is really excited. You can really tell when Matt LaFleur likes a prospect. I've made the joke all summer that Josiah DeGuara is the one that Matt LaFleur had a draft crush on, very similar to the way that he used to glow about Elton Jenkins. That's how he talks about Josiah DeGuara. But AJ Dillon is another guy like that. This is a guy who coached Derrick Henry and said, we've never seen a running back built like that. Will that translate on the field? That remains to be seen. So you mentioned who your guy is real quick. I like what you talked about as far as MVS as well. And you want to talk about the Packers haven't had a consistent deep threat since prime Jordy in 2014. I don't think it's coincidental that their offense has kind of not been the same since that time frame. So if he can be the guy, that's a big summer for him. Who's somebody that we haven't talked about, offense or defense, that you think could be a bigger key that maybe isn't being discussed as much for the team going into their season?
Yeah, I guess the player I would bring up, we talked about how defense is a little bit boring, but Kamal Martin, in this inside linebacker battle, we just talked about how inside linebacker has been kind of this, deficient group for them for a long time. And now they've got this, position battle going on. And of the guys kind of duking it out, the 5th round pick, Martin, is the only rookie in the fray. And you can tell that the organization really likes him. LaFleur said he was long and athletic, and Gutekunst said he was dynamic. And this is a guy who, during all of the prep work and all the Zoom meetings, like, you can really tell right off the bat who's going to be dedicated and who's going to slack off. And he came in, he knew, the entire scheme. He is someone who's just been really enthusiastic. And then finally they get on the field. And he got through DeGuara, who was the lead blocker, like nothing. And then he broke through again to take down Crockett. So we've already seen him making moves. And so ultimately, we look at that group, and unfortunately I feel kind of bad because Curtis Bolton is out on PUP, but I think that that's probably the odd man out when you've got, Kirksey, Burks, and Summers.
Interesting. I enjoy the Kamal Martin idea there as well. That's a Christian Kirksey's kind of a popular name, obviously, at the position. He's the veteran, but he has had some injury issues, obviously, as well. But it sounds like the Packers really do feel like they've upgraded in the middle, and that's not a slight to Blake Martinez, even if it sounds like one. She's Michelle Bruton. You can catch her all over the place, like she mentioned earlier, Packers Wire, Draft Wire, and a writer of books. So did you write anything that's written behind you? That's my first question that I want to know.
So I'm actually an editor of books. I'm still looking to write my first book, which I would love to do. But my full-time job, there was, a year in 2018 that I was writing full-time and actually did not like it and went back to editing full-time. Writing is something I like to do kind of on my own. But my full-time job is I'm a book editor at Triumph Books in Chicago. We do lots of Packers books. Most of these books behind me are Triumph books. I think one of our most recent books is one called Big 50 Green Bay Packers, which is like a nice little collection of essays about the Packers. I will. I haven't been doing as much Packers writing lately, which people who follow me on Twitter probably know. But I am going to have, as part of Fansided's NFL season preview, I'm doing the Packers article, and it's basically just a deep dive on Aaron Rodgers. So that'll be coming out probably next week, I think.
Well, if you ever want to write a weekly column or something like that, I think I know a site that might have a home for you. So I'll have my people call your people.
Yeah,
otherwise,
right.
Michelle, thank you for coming. I appreciate you being here, and we look forward to talking to you again after the Packers win this season's Super Bowl. How about that?
Sounds great. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks so much, Michelle.
Okay.
That is Michelle Bruton, and she can be found all over the place. Like we just mentioned, feel free to follow some of her stuff, like we've got going here, Triumph Books, and I'll throw her Twitter handle up here one more time. That is Michelle Bruton, at Michelle Bruton on the tweet machine. So catch that. Jason, we have some orders of business to follow here. We have finally the Kenny Clark giveaway. So thank you to everybody, first of all, who've entered. What I'm going to do now is share my screen so this can be as authentic as possible. So if you guys are, forgive me here a little bit if this is a little difficult, but here is everybody that has entered our drawing, and it goes from number 1 to number 348. So we have every drawing in. Thank you to our social media team for helping put this together. We are appreciative of that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to a random number generator right here. We have the minimum of 1, obviously, and the maximum, like I just mentioned, is going to be 348. And drum roll, everybody. Our number is 298. So number 298 on my spreadsheet here is escaping me. Jacob Ciabatti. Jacob Ciabatti, I apologize if I butchered that completely, but we will contact. Could be. We will contact you on Twitter and find the way, but you are the lucky winner of the Kenny Clark giveaway. If you missed out this time around, do not worry. That is not the last giveaway we will do. We will talk about more of those as they go along here, but thank you guys for participating in that. That was a lot of fun. I believe, Jason, we had something else as well. We have another very special guest for Wednesday's version.
Oh, so cool.
Of Lombardi's Bar, and hit the number. Elton Jenkins. Elton Jenkins will be joining the guys on Wednesday night in the bar, same place that has gone to Jamal Williams, Kenny Clark, Ethan Bacon, which if you missed that interview yesterday, make sure you check those. It's been a lot of fun on that, getting all these guys in here and just being able to talk about some of their stories and stuff like that. Like I mentioned, Ethan Bacon stuff from yesterday. He's got some really cool things on his Aaron Rodgers documentary, as well as the Mac Fund. Guys, for the rest of this week too. So that is Wednesday night. Tomorrow, our doubleheader, double barrel action, happy hour, and the Freezer podcast. The girls, Maggie and Perry, Maggie Loney, Perry Goldstein, they will go around 6 o'clock, and the guys will follow right after 7:15, kind of depending on that time frame as well. Jason, we've got the Quick Slants podcast coming up again this week as well. What are you talking about? Can you give us a little preview?
Yeah, so I'm going to just continue to talk about what's happening at training camp, and then any breaking news that goes on, and I might talk a little bit about some additional moves that the Packers could make before the beginning of the season that we may not be thinking about right now.
There you go. So a few things that they could make and moves that we're not necessarily thinking or talking about. So I'll be interested to listen to that. It's a fun listen every week, guys, and it really is. It's just a quick 20 minutes. That's the reason Quick's in the name. In honor of Michelle, I suppose we can use a few puns towards the end here. Next week, Jimmy Christensen and I go on our foray. Ladies and gentlemen, the logo on this hat right here will be on my body. I'm not decided where just yet, nor is Jimmy. Jimmy, please don't say where, because I'm afraid of what. I don't want to know. Let's just put it that way. But Jimmy will be down here. We'll try and document that as much as possible. But we'll enjoy that. And then Sunday, we have the great Bryce Christensen of the Unknown Packers podcast. He's been on the show before, but as we mentioned during the mega show, we kind of felt like we owed him one, because during his segment of the mega show, we unexpectedly had Vernon Scott drop in. And when Vernon Scott drops in, you sit there and you talk about Vernon Scott more than Bryce. So we look forward to him. The Unknown Packers podcast is a friend of the show. As always, guys, like we've mentioned several times before, go to our Facebook page, Game On Wisconsin. Subscribe to us on YouTube at Game On Wisconsin. The Instagram is the same, Game On Wisconsin. And follow us on Twitter at Game On WI. That's where you find a majority of our giveaways, our plans for the week, and everything of that sort. You could follow me personally if you'd like. I am at Jacob Westendorf. You can follow Jason. He's at Jason Perrone. Paul's not here, and that makes us sad, but he'll be back next week, and we will have him. He is at Paul_Brettel. That is where you will be able to find him and everything that you need as far as your Packers-related needs. Guys, and Jason, real quick, anything before we sign off that we haven't talked about? 3 weeks from today is opening day, so that's exciting.
There it is right there. The countdown is on, and it's under 30. That's the most important thing. We're in the month, for the month. not technically because we're not in September yet, but when we're less than 30 days out, that gets really exciting. And it's also exciting for us because that means our famous annual tradition, our season preview show, is right around the corner as well.
That's right. And once we hammer out and completely finalize a date, we will make sure that we tell you guys about that. But what you'll do, our season preview show, we pick all 16 Packers games and have our playoffs and Super Bowl picks and everything like that. So that will take place as well. A lot of fun, a lot of good things still to come here. Thank you guys that have followed along. Thank you to those of you that were in the chat. Big B, you're right. Jamal Williams is the GOAT. Steve, thank you for coming in real quick. We should probably get to this. Just some thoughts on the touchdown regression versus Adams. I think that's probably about right. Aaron Jones not going to score 23 touchdowns again. Devontae will probably score a few more, and it'll all work out well because the Packers offense. Thank you to Dr. Pepper for jumping in. I will appreciate you always stopping by, and I look forward to seeing all you guys. Sanjay, thanks for joining into the chat. We love hearing from you guys. Looking forward to the freezer tomorrow. Everyone that was in the chat, everyone that talked, everyone that joined our giveaways. I look forward to doing more of that stuff for you guys. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate everything. I really can't say that enough. So thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next time.